Okay, well, welcome to the 2026 PCL Annual Environmental Assembly. In the name of the climate, environmental and community protection in a warming world. So I'll talk in a minute why we pick these titles every year. My name is Howard Penn. I'm the Executive Director of Planning and Conservation League. And I wanted to welcome you to our annual assembly. Looking forward to spending the day with you today, talking about some interesting and robust topics. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming. Each year, PCL's Assembly Committee picks a theme for our conference. And we often pick the climate theme because a number of our sessions discuss topics directly related to the impacts of climate or solutions for slowing climate change. We live not only in a changing global climate, but also in a changing political climate. Finding solutions to our state's environmental and public health challenges, all while navigating the current political climate, is an art. It's what PCL does every day at the Capitol. And today, we have invited a number of artistic thinkers to speak about their ideas and how to help make California more sustainable and livable for all. So, I hope you brought your thinking caps. A lot of the work that we do at the Capitol is very technical. It's very wonky, I like to say. It's very in the trenches. And I've asked our panelists today to go there, to get as technical and detailed as possible. Because we find, working the halls every day and working with legislators and staff and agencies, that the solutions are in the dotting of I's and crossing of T's. I like to say I'm helping save the world one word at a time. So, engage in that today. Ask challenging questions. Be respectful, but ask challenging questions. We've got some of the smartest thinkers on these issues here today, and I hope that we can glean as much insight and information from them as possible so that many of you that run other organizations and work with us in this field can bring those solutions forward. We've got challenging times, we know that. And the solutions that all of us are working on are viable, even during this time. But we do have to put our thinking caps on and figure out how to get it across the goal line. So I'm looking forward to today inspiring us and moving forward with some of the challenges we have ahead here in 26 and in a few of the years ahead, legislatively and regulatorily, and then also with some of our community development processes we'll talk about more later. So, we could not be here if it was not for our co-host. So I want to thank UC Davis and the California Environmental Law and Policy Center. I'd like to thank Tracy Windsor, co-director of the center, for hosting us, and her wonderful team members, Jesus and Andrea, who helped us organize this today. Thank you very much. You're going to hear from a few welcoming speakers here, and then we're going to jump right into the morning panel. So I'm going to invite my chair of the PCL board up, Doug Karstens, to make some welcoming remarks. Thanks, Doug.
Well, welcome, PCL. Good morning. This is great to be back here to our annual conference. My name is Doug Karstens, president of the board, and I and all our board members would like to welcome you enormously. This year's panel, the title, in the name of the climate, environmental, and community protection in a warming world. Well, warming means variability. Warming means it's really cold in places it shouldn't be cold. Also, I was just talking with Emily, flying in from Minnesota, sub-zero temperatures, and this is the world we are today. So we're here. Remember that movie, The Day After Tomorrow? The day after tomorrow is here with all that ice storms moving in. I'd also like to add my thanks to Howard's, to the UC Davis Professor Frank and Tracy Windsor, the co-director. I'm going to turn the podium over to you in a moment. So I really appreciate your having us here and welcoming us essentially to your home away from home. We assemble here once again because of the challenging times. What a phrase, challenging times. I mean, where do we start? I want to hark back to some of the core values or things that brought us all together and continue to bring us together. I'm going to use the words planning and conservation and league. Planning means consideration of others' views and cooperation to achieving predictability and good outcomes for everybody as much as possible. It's not a winner-take-all world, or at least it shouldn't be. It should be that we're all winners, and that's what planning can be about. Conservation, that recognizes communities and the relationships we have are worth saving and growing. Protecting the air we all breathe and the water we all drink, the places we all love, and that's what makes everyday heroes out of all of us. I know people are marching in the streets, or we're in our offices, or we're in our classrooms, but we're the heroes that we need. And the League, Planning Conservation League means working in concert and bringing together different experiences, and again, promoting those shared goals and creating a better world. Sounds optimistic. I know it's easy to fall back, let's say, into the hatred and the vitriol, but I like to focus on the positive, so we'll stay there. So what are we doing here today? We're going to hear from the esteemed cast of the best characters, officials, former officials, mayors, and council members, the senator, consultants, activists, executive directors, experts, ordinary people, non-experts. And we have a great ensemble of speakers, challenging topics to delve into: state actions and local innovation, groundwater, climate protection, affordability of housing. We'll discuss exemptions and abundance and accountability. So please join us today. Welcome to this conference. And let me ask, again, the co-director of the Environmental Law and Policy Center here at UC Davis, Tracy Windsor. Please come up to the podium and help me welcome everybody, and welcome to you. So, thank you.
Thanks, Doug. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I see some familiar faces from my students in the Environmental Policy and Management program, and I also see some of my students from the undergraduate Department of Environmental Science and Policy with UC Davis. I am a very new co-director, and so I'd like to thank my predecessor, Rick Frank, for having the confidence to hand this really important position off to me. I'm the co-director of the California Environmental Law and Policy Center. That's us. PCL was kind enough to put us on their materials. This is a partnership that we've enjoyed hosting this conference and assembly of great thinkers, as you just heard, for the past 3 years. But this is not the first time that we've been fortunate to host this gathering. And we actually have hosted this gathering as far back as 20 years. And I was so informed by Rick, he's passing the institutional knowledge along to me as we may over coffee or breakfast, as we did this morning. So one of the really nice things about this conference is the opportunities that it brings, and we're so grateful and pleased to be able to continue that tradition of offering a place for these conversations to happen that are so important, and creating these opportunities for students to come. And PCL is kind enough to provide scholarships to numerous students that could participate here today. So I wanted to say thank you for that as well. One of the things I would mention is a little bit about my own background. I am a proud alumna of King Hall. This is a wonderful school, so those law students that are joining us, I hope share that same sentiment. I graduated from here in 1996, and I was fortunate to take Rick Frank's environmental law class, and I was also first introduced to PCL as a law student. I remember back then thinking, gosh, there's these two acronyms, PLF and PCL, and trying to like straighten them out, and then it quickly became apparent that they were very easy to keep straight in terms of their ideological mindset. So that was my first introduction to both PCL and environmental law, and I learned then that PCL was instrumental in the adoption of the California Environmental Quality Act. And for 60 years, it's been instrumental and continues to be instrumental in environmental policy. It has an extensive list of concrete and measurable outcomes that I was fortunate to hear about at their 60th anniversary last year. Their party that they had was a great party too, so thank you for that. And they also partner with local and regional environmental groups across the state, so furthering that ability to communicate and support each other in this critically important dialogue. It has also, over the years, collaborated with King Hall faculty and alumni, including Rick Frank and Kerrigan Burke, Jennifer Harder, and our dearly beloved and departed Cliff Lee. So there's been lots of opportunities to further that dialogue as well through scholarly discussion, proposed policy, and legal amendments, including, again, revisiting ideas to try to make positive amendments to CEQA. We're lucky that we also recently welcomed Kevin Johnson to the advisory board for the California Environmental Law and Policy Center at the suggestion of Corey Brown. So I expect to hear a lot of softball conversations in the future. And we certainly look forward to continuing the collaboration and longstanding dialogue and exchange of ideas, including on the drivers of climate change that we're all here to talk about today. Before I step down, I do want to actually just put in a little plug that there's a little half-page thing in your folder, and it is the King Hall 47th annual charity auction, which is actually occurring tonight in the ballroom, the ARC ballroom on campus. And this is a silent and live auction that's a lot of fun, and it supports public interest work by King Hall law students. So I want to encourage you to think about it if you're around and you want to drop by that. And then they also have a little QR code for a live silent auction that's going on. And the last thing I will mention is that on the events page for SELPC, we will be having a conference, and we hope some of you can join us in February on wildfire resiliency, an all-day conference on that, and hope to continue some of the dialogue that we start here today about moving into a new regime in light of a changing climate and wildfire specifically. So thank you for being here, and hand it back.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Doug. Okay, so indulge me with a little bit of patience here. I have a few thank yous and a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll get right into our morning session. So first, I want to thank our sponsors. We could not do this without our sponsors. Events like this are becoming less and less, as you've noticed, post-COVID. Lots of online webinars nowadays that all of us here probably attend, as I do. But I'm old school. I like to be here in person. So holding these in-person conferences have taken on a different challenge at post-COVID, and I really, really want to thank our sponsors because, again, we could not do this without them. So our co-host to UC Davis and the center, our gold sponsors, Carson's Black Mentir LLP, National Wildlife Federation, and Sage Sweetwood. Our silver sponsors, East Bay Municipal Utility District, Rachel Hooper and Peter Zing, and Shoot Mahaly and Weinberger LLP. And our bronze sponsors, the Center for Biological Diversity, Green California, Kevin Johnson, and Sacramento Municipal Utility District. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll do a little bit more thank yous at lunchtime as well, but want to call out our sponsors as key to this event. Next, I'd like to acknowledge a number of our elected officials here with us today. We will have later this afternoon State Senator Krista Cabalden. He was also former mayor of West Sacramento. Mayor Martha Guerrero, she's here as mayor of West Sacramento. She'll be here in our first morning panel. Former state assembly member and Sacramento County Supervisor and current Sacramento City Council member Roger Dickinson. He'll be helping us facilitate that morning panel this morning, a mayoral conversation, so to say. From Sacramento Municipal Utility District, we have a number of board members here. We've got Dave Tamayo, board president. Thank you, Dave, for being here. Heidi Sanborn. Is Heidi here? Not yet. Brandon Rose. Is Brandon here? There we go. There's Brandon. Thank you so much for coming. And a couple former elected officials. So we have former city council member, mayor of Sacramento, and state senate president pro tem. Who's that guy? Daryl Steinberg, he's here. He'll be on the morning panel. We really appreciate Daryl coming. And former mayor of Benicia, Elizabeth Patterson. She was actually really helpful in putting together one of our panels this afternoon or this morning. So thank you all for being here. And I have to say, thank you for stepping up and serving our great democracy, because we need you more than ever right now. And I am a huge fan of supporting local elected officials. I have 2 candidates that I'm helping in the November election coming up. So plug in to candidates. I don't care what your political affiliation is. I support democracy. So get involved in local elected campaigns. It's where truly the rubber meets the road, literally, okay? So if it's for school board or city council, or as the proverbial dog catcher campaign colloquialism is used, get involved and run for office. We need more people running for local elected office. There's my stump speech. Okay. A little housekeeping before we get started on our panels today. After the morning panel and the breakout sessions later this morning that end at 12:45, we ask that you pick up your box of lunch down the hall. It's right there by the bathrooms, little zigzag around the corner past breakfast. That's where the lunches will be in box lunch type scenarios. And then come back here to this assembly hall as quickly as possible. We would like everyone to have their lunch and be seated as quickly as possible so we can begin our lunch session right away at 1 o'clock. It takes time for people to get their lunch. I know you want to network and chit-chat in the hallways. I really appreciate and support that. But if you could get back here as close to 1 o'clock as possible, I really want to get started at 1. Our keynote speaker will speak, and then right after that, we have a full assembly plenary session with some great panelists, and so I want to respect their time as well. In your folders are questionnaires, okay? They look like this. Oops, sorry, nothing on the back, just one page, that's easy. So please fill this out. I know it's really fun, but we really use your feedback. I read every single one of these right after the assembly. I take notes, and we try as hard as we can to incorporate your suggestions into next year. And after 40 years, you'd think we would do this perfectly. We don't. So please let us know what was not perfect and give us good feedback so my staff and I can be happy about what we worked so hard for, and give us constructive feedback, okay? Lastly, and I would be amiss as an executive director of a nonprofit if I did not ask for your donation. So there's a remittance envelope in your packet. We cannot do all the work we do in this state and at the Capitol if it was not for your support. So if you liked what you heard today, if you appreciate what we do, please make a donation. Put it in the envelope. You can drop it with your fully filled out questionnaire, okay? Did I do well, board members? Is that good? Okay, excellent. Yeah, it's okay. There we go. Okay, let's get into our morning session. So I'm going to introduce Roger Dickinson here in a minute. He's going to moderate, and he'll introduce the 2 panelists. We've got local innovations inspire state actions and mayoral conversation. So Roger is the Sacramento City Council member for District 2, former state assembly member, and Sacramento County Supervisor, and all-around cool dude. I've known Roger for a while.
Good morning. Thank you, Howard. I do think this first session this morning could have not focused on what we're going to talk about, but rather, what's up with the Thule fog?
See if the mirrors can fix that. Yep.
I know. I had to slow down below 90 miles an hour coming over here. Thank you for reminding us to fill out the evaluation form. Mine is ready. Best speaker.
Yes.
Roger. Yeah. Okay, and I did want to add one other introduction to a former elected official. Dave Jones is with us. Dave's greatest distinction, I have to tell you, is he was the voice of reason in the California State Assembly between Darrell Steinberg and me. So, Martha, there's Martha, and oh yeah, you can't talk from up there. You have to come down here. As much as you may try. So we're just a few minutes behind schedule, so I'm going to cut my opening remarks down to an hour. But I don't know to the extent to which either of these terrific folks need any introduction to you. But by way of that introduction, first of all, Mayor Martha Guerrero from the city of West Sacramento is here. Martha was elected to the West Sacramento City Council in 2018, elected as mayor in 2020. She is also a longtime lobbyist at the state level, and part of our perspective this morning to try to convey to you is the challenge and our difference in perspectives of being elected or working both at the state level and at the local level. And of course, the person who does need no introduction to this audience, and although a little known graduate of this law school, and I think they're most proud of that, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
King Hall.
At least for this morning.
I say the same when I go to McGeorge. Yes.
There's no office he hasn't held or aspired to.
That's so true.
Lucky for all of us, he actually has held a number of offices, starting with the Sacramento City Council, of course, moving on to the California State Assembly, the California State Senate, and most recently, mayor of the city of Sacramento. So how about a welcome for both Martha and Darrell? I don't want to say a lot at the outset. I want to hear from them and then rebut them. But I will say this, that when I was a member of the Board of Supervisors, I was one of those who certainly subscribed to the mantra of local control and inveighed against the importunings of the legislature, primarily the federal government to some extent, but was a devotee, certainly, of that principle that the best decisions are made at the local level, and we know better what to do than the folks who sit at those higher levels of government. When I moved to the State Assembly, my view modified slightly. And I was still a strong believer in local control when it was the right thing to do. So I think that to a certain extent captures the elements that affect the thinking that people have as they change levels of government, their responsibilities change, the scope of what they do changes, and how they do things change. And so I know that both Martha and Darrell will share with us how they have seen things both from the local perspective as well as the state perspective, and how that has affected their thinking over time and all the issues that they have had to deal with. So with that, let me pass the rhetorical baton to Martha, and we'll have you start, because I think you actually have something prepared, which is shocking to me, but nonetheless, of interest and entertainment for the rest of us.
Okay.
So, Martha, take it away.
Thank you, Roger, and good morning, everybody. It is really nice to be here among friends who really care about our climate and making sure that, you know, what we have facing us today, you know, with the federal lack of support and what we anticipate is falling behind meeting our goals for climate change and resiliency. And as we think about that, and as we think about where we need to go in our community, whether it be housing, construction, and the lack of funding and support for that, or state mandates, and how are we going to achieve those. And I also want to recognize James Corliss from SACOG, who tries to bring this all together and bring some perspective. He does a lot of work. James, there you are, James. Thank you, James. In my past time in the board of directors, it is a very intense period of time to bring all the region together, all the counties and the cities, to work collaboratively as a region. And when I first heard about this, I thought I'd like to present VIA, an on-demand rideshare program that we successfully implemented back in 2018. It was more focused on climate, and then I received more of an elaborate presentation on what we are going to discuss. But I'm just going to throw in a plug-in for VIA and why this is important and relevant, as it helps us, not only that, but the light rail, helps us to anchor and leverage funding. So VIA is our on-demand rideshare. It supplements what we have in our Yolo County Transit program. And it is an app that you use with the vans that they provide, and it helps people to get to their first and last mile, where you cannot get on a bus, yet, but it helps you to get to the bus and then either get to other destinations quickly. So it is, on average, a very short ride for most people. And it's shared, so everybody jumps on a van, and it uses AI technology to help guide where the van should go around and pick people up. In addition, since COVID, we have seen 1.1 million ride users. And what's interesting is the goal of where these people go. It is recreation, healthcare, and shopping. Those are the main goals. And not only that, but in those areas of the shopping is our jobs. It gets people to their jobs. So when we take a look at the average ridership per hour, we see the peak day, when others are on the road driving their cars. VIA is meeting that demand to get people out of their cars and into shared mobility. And so, as I mentioned, the smart routing helps to get people to their destination sooner and to get picked up quickly. And for me, as a social worker, one key element is who is riding VIA. It is the people that I think, in looking at our climate action goals, they're the people who don't have multiple cars, one car per family. They're the people that are lower income levels, and they are our older residents who want to continue to live independently and get to their medical care or get to the grocery store and back quickly. And so this 59% of rides currently serving the disadvantaged community, which is our Brighton Broderick area, that is what I find most compelling to have an on-demand rideshare program. So riders are very comfortable and happy with as far as the feedback we receive, and they always return for another booking. And there are active riders. So we are currently taking a look at the future planning of VIA. Because of the cost of public transportation, we want to make sure we preserve Yolo County Transit and an on-demand rideshare for the broader scope of what we want to accomplish in meeting our climate action goals. And folks that are riding it are very happy and provide the testimony to make sure that we are meeting everybody who is in need of public transportation. So that's just a short little presentation that then I'm sure you'll have other questions, and I wanted to provide that. And Daryl, you're next.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha and Mayor Guerrero, and thank you, Roger. I don't have a PowerPoint. I've actually never done a PowerPoint in my life. But, and I'm But I thought, and I'm not in public office now, of course, so I don't have the opportunity like Mayor Guerrero to sort of present direction of my city, although I think my city is moving in a good direction in many, many ways. But I thought I would step back and maybe talk a little bit about local control, because I know it is a theme. And, you know, I guess I have the advantage or disadvantage of having served both at high levels in local government and in state government. And so I get asked all the time, which one did you like better? What was better? And, you know, sometimes even the local control question, who should have the authority or the power? And when Roger gave his introduction and talked about the fact that his views maybe modified a little bit when he became a state assembly member, you all laughed, and, you know, it's kind of funny, but I think we ought to, like, pick up on that for a moment, because I think there was some real insight there. When people talk about local control, which in concept and principle is not a bad thing, I always ask the question, local control for what? Local control for what? Let's take the housing issue as one example, which of course has become the preeminent issue of our time. And by the way, when I was pro tem of the Senate, I tried, along with a couple other colleagues, to make housing a much greater infrastructure priority, and no one really wanted to talk about housing. It was all transportation, water, and climate. In fact, I was so desperate in my last year as Senate leader to fund SB 375, which was the land use transportation climate bill that I was privileged to author in 2007, that I actually worked out a deal with Jerry Brown, who is the governor at the time, to say, okay, you can get a permanent continuous appropriation for high-speed rail. I'll support that, but only if you agree to 30% of the cap and trade fund for the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Fund, which was the Smart Growth Fund. And that has delivered billions of dollars. But it was an act of desperation because there was no other source of funding, permanent source of funding for housing. So I digress. Let's talk about local control and housing for just a moment. Is homelessness the crisis we make it out to be? Is housing the priority that we say that it is? I want to say to you, not in a cynical way, but in a genuine way, that I think we cry a lot of crocodile tears about these issues. We cry a lot of crocodile tears because we balance the imperative of housing, which I've argued for a number of years ought to be a human and, frankly, a legal right, that everyone ought to be housed just as everyone ought to have access to a free public education. Thank you. However, we collectively, and it's not bad faith or bad acts, it's just the way that it is, we stop short of saying housing must be a legal right or even a fundamental human right, because we grant local communities the ability to still say no to a lot of housing projects, and sometimes for good reason. But I would ask the rhetorical question, is any reason good enough to say no to trying to address the plight of people who have nothing or who are living in squalid circumstances? We talk a lot about RHNA and cities having to meet a regional housing needs alliance. Mayor Guerrero and I talked about this on the way from the parking lot this morning. And I ask a different question. Why is the only imperative in the housing arena planning requirement? There's no production standard. There's no collective goal. Gavin Newsom put out, you know, the famous, whatever it was, 3.5 million units. Was that what it was when he yeah, and you know, he got kind of mocked for that, but it was at least an aspiration. But there's nothing in the law that says we are going to drive towards a certain production goal and number. And so I think one of the reasons I was thinking about local control, which is neither good nor bad, versus state power, but I think that the local control debate is both the cause and the symptom of a larger problem, that we fail to articulate what it is we want and demand in society. We're clear on some things. We're clear that every child has a free public education, and boom, we, without even thinking about it, build public schools so that everybody's got a place to go. We're unclear, really, whether or not housing versus climate versus the environment, versus climate, versus economic development in general, what is more important and how we balance that in state policy. And so what is the ultimate answer to the debate between state power and local control? It's a simple answer, even though it's hard to implement, which is the state ought to set the standard, always. The state ought to set the requirement. The state ought to hold locals accountable to those requirements. And then we ought to say to the local governments, do it however you want, in whatever way best suits your culture, your needs. But you can't use local control as a cudgel or an excuse to say you're not going to do what the society, through its state government, rightfully demands that you do on behalf of all the citizenry. If only people would follow my advice, the state would be in perfect and great shape. But that's my opening, so thank you.
What was your advice? Oh, yeah. Well, thank you both. I think actually in your separate remarks you captured the core of what we want to spend the balance of our time digging a little more deeply into. And actually I appreciate, Darrell, your what I think are provocative and thought-provoking remarks. I also agree with you entirely that the best approach at the state level is to set the goal or the standards and then tell local governments, you to get there any way you want to that's legal. We're not going to tell you how to get there. And I think that what those of us in local government often chafe the most at is the prescriptive approach that often comes from the state level and from the federal level. But I will give you a vignette of perhaps my personal most telling example of this tension between local control and state direction, and that actually had to do with education, where I carried legislation to address the standards for discipline in the schools, using what's known as willful defiance to suspend or expel students, which had very, very negative consequences for kids of color, LGBTQ plus kids, for disabled kids who were disproportionately suspended and expelled for behavior that was considered unacceptable in the schools. And the governor, who was also Jerry Brown at that time, said, well, I don't believe in what you want to do, Roger, because I believe in the principle of subsidiarity. My dictionary didn't have that principle in it, but that aside, it was basically the schools, the teachers, and the administrators at the local level ought to get to determine how they impose and exact discipline in the schools, notwithstanding the consequences of the disparate and uneven application of discipline across school districts. It took a long, hard time and 2 bills to convince the governor to go at least some steps down the direction of recognizing that the state did have a role in describing and setting the standards for that kind of discipline. But it was exactly the argument of that the state's role versus the local school's role, and we see it. We see it now. I think you raised housing as an issue. I mean, we see it with housing. We see it with climate. We see it with infrastructure. Most recently, there has been, in the last 6 years, a plethora of bills signed into law at the state level addressing housing in a effort, and I think a genuine effort to try to stimulate more housing production in the state. But the avenue for a lot of this legislation is actually to reduce the discretion of local governments. And so now we have legislation that says you shall not have any kind of environmental review of the following types of projects. Even though at the local level, when those projects get built, they may have real consequences for traffic, for noise, for other kinds of elements that do have an impact on the quality and character of life. And so I suspect that as we go through the years, we will find ourselves collectively at the local level trying to ameliorate conditions that would have been identified and perhaps mitigated had they been assessed at the outset. But the mindset right now is that those elements are just used to get in the way of housing production. That is the tension that I think we see between what goes on at the state level and the local level in a number of different areas. So let's stay with housing, Martha and Daryl, for a few minutes, and give me your thoughts, particularly looking at it from the local level, about what you're facing with respect to the state's housing legislation and the demands and requirements and the limitations that it puts on you. And Daryl, you can go back to your days as mayor, certainly, and Martha in your current capacity. Please.
Okay. Well, very good question. I have seen a lot of interest as you see in West Sacramento, to build housing. But the cost of building that housing is a hurdle for many developers. And the construction cost lately has become a greater burden due to the tariffs. But what we have applied are instruments, financing tools, in order to overcome some of those hurdles, and receiving the grants as well. But the benefit and the advantage of West Sacramento is the long-term planning since we became a city, is having a general plan, but also having in place sites where we were already in the works developing certain number of housing needs, where when we submitted our regional housing needs assessment, we were looking at meeting these goals within the time frame. But what we do have is sometimes the barrier of the affordable housing construction cost and meeting that goal. And that's where the grants that Daryl Steinberg referenced has come into play. And it only came into play because we have a light rail plan and we have a robust public transportation, where you saw VIA as one of the options. That's the only reason why we are being successful in meeting our RHNA needs, is to be able to draw down and leverage what we currently have in place, and even the federal funding that has been sitting, waiting to be implemented for the last 15 years. So to look at it, as James has looked at from the SACOG region, where other regions do not have the benefit of a robust public transportation model with funding set aside, with buy-in already from the community and support from our federal and local advocates, it is going to be incredibly difficult for any local jurisdiction to achieve what West Sacramento has already achieved. And it's because we've been able to draw down recent state funding for 40-something million for our Grand Gateway, that we were able to overcome the penalty of the builder's remedy. We were pretty much at risk of being in that situation, and no jurisdiction wants to be caught in that situation where a developer comes in and decides what they want to do. So we were very fortunate. It was a huge sigh of relief for all of us to be able to acquire that grant and to be able to overcome a penalty. But what I find are other jurisdictions are not as fortunate, and that's why the blueprint that SACOG has developed gives local jurisdictions, which I highly recommend you read the Bible, gives local jurisdictions that plan, which is an element of the effort for the RHNA goals for local jurisdictions. So with that, I think that is something that I find successful, is that long-term planning and great staff, a great team that puts in those grants, and we can secure them in order to achieve our RHNA goals. And the next phase is going to be at the federal level, when we are taking a look at what federal funding we can draw down in order to build our housing. That's going to be an ongoing process, but I do find bipartisan support in working in Congress to be able to draw down the federal funding, which is a little, giving us some hope in order to be able to achieve those goals in the future.
Thank you. So in the first question, I was critical of, in some ways, the concept of local control. Let me use this next question to be critical of the state of California for a moment in regard. I think the state could and should do a much better job of differentiating between cities and counties that are pro-housing and that are actually being aggressive about meeting their housing element, and those cities and counties that are not. And in some ways they do. The governor has set up a unit to litigate against cities that are just objectively turning their back on trying to increase their affordable housing component in their cities. But funding, for example, is not aligned to where the state wants to see better performance. And I'll give you two examples. Number one is when it comes to homelessness, the so-called Homeless Assistance Program, which has been a major source of funding for cities. Traditionally, of course, all the mental health and substance abuse and, quote, homeless money ran through counties. When I led the big city mayors in 2019, we pioneered the idea of direct allocation of funding to cities for homelessness because we needed the capacity to build our own beds and not just rely on our county partners, and we've been successful to the tune of billions of dollars. So in 2024, the city of Sacramento reports a 29%, city and county, excuse me, reported 29% reduction in homelessness, 41% unsheltered. And it was a good moment for us, at least to show that the trend was working the right way. What happened the next year? State funding under HAP has been decreased because we have a lesser number. Ridiculous. They should be incentivizing and providing more resources for the communities that are doing better. Second example, and this is one where a little full disclosure, in my new life, non-public life, I'm privileged to be working for the 4 major metropolitan planning organizations, the MPOs, including SACOG, on a project to modernize my old SB 375 from 2007. As I say, I thought I had written the perfect bill. I thought. And I was just turned out to be disappointing in that way. It's been a great, it's been a very successful piece of legislation, but albeit a decade and a half later, it's time for retooling. Well, one of the fundamental problems with the implementation of the law is that, especially with the loss of redevelopment funding, that the state funding sources are not aligned with the really important aspirational goals that are contained within these regional plans known as the sustainable community strategies. So if you want to find, by the way, and I will talk a little bit more of this, sort of a middle ground between local control and state regulation, you need look no farther than regional government in California, because that's where you can actually realize, I think, the climate goals that are imperative. You can build in the regional housing needs assessment and the housing goals within those plans. But if the funding is not aligned with what you want to see, then the plans themselves are not going to be nearly as impactful as they otherwise could be. And that's actually the experience, in addition to some other issues and problems, that regional governments throughout California are facing. So the state, if it is going to be serious about setting outcomes and objectives, needs to do a much better job of aligning funding to the outcomes that the state wants to see.
I think that is a really important point. And I would simply amplify it to add this, that it's also unpredictable. And take the HAP funding that Darrell just referred to, the homeless assistance money that was cut for the city of Sacramento after there was a reporting of some success in the reduction of number of unsheltered on the streets. But that program is funded or not year to year, which does not work very well for local governments and organizations that need to be able to plan what they're going to do, not in just the next 12 months, but over the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And one of the things that I wish would happen, and I certainly have been a vocal proponent of, is the state on its homeless funding in particular. This could apply to a number of different areas, of course. Say, this is what we're going to do each year for the next 5 years. Now, recognizing that every year you have to adopt a state budget and you have to have those appropriations, but somewhat like the climate deal that was struck when we were in the midst of the budget surpluses, oh so happily ago, at least set a expectation of what we would do. And while that deal has changed over the years, as probably most of you know, and money moved from the general fund to Prop 4 and to its special funds, things of that kind, it didn't go away as a discussion point each year because there had been that agreement. At least that's my assessment of what had happened there. I want to switch a little bit in this because I think this point of the tension between the state and local governments is worth spending a little bit more time on. And so there are opportunities at the state level to drive local direction, not by imposing it, but by being, in a sense, the force that will impose it if local governments don't do what they need to do. And so there's a couple of, I think, great examples of that, but the one I'll point to, and I know there's going to be a session after this on it, is SGMA. Now, by the way, as an aside, if you like SGMA and you think that's good legislation, I was one of the authors. If you're not so hot on it, I had nothing to do with it. But the structure of SGMA, as many of you may know, is that it is left to the local level to assess the conditions of groundwater in each basin as required and designated, and then develop a plan approved by the Department of Water Resources at the state level and implement that plan to get to sustainability by 2040 or 2042, depending on some other factors. If the plans were not developed or not approved at the local level and by the Department of Water Resources, then the State Water Resources Control Board has the power under the legislation to step in and take over the activities at the basin level, the local level, required to get to sustainability. It was, as some of us said, having the state as really the boogeyman. Because what it did for local government was it gave the local officials the ability to say, we got to do this even if we don't want to, because if we don't, the state's going to step in, and we really don't want that. That was very intentional. And I think it is actually, my observation, it is worked reasonably well. But I wonder from each of you whether there are other areas in which you think this same kind of structure could work with respect to climate or infrastructure or housing, to leave the ability at the local level to shape how you go at getting to whatever the outcome or the goal is, but leaving it also not at the whim of local government ultimately to get there.
Well, Gerald, as you know, we have a joint climate action plan. When
Yeah.
we studied together what we can do to move forward with reducing the impacts of what we're accomplishing here, and gas emissions being one of the biggest. And in West Sacramento, we're surrounded by water, and flood protection was another area that we needed to secure, and we achieved that goal, but the funding was stripped from our New Start funding of $1 billion under the Trump administration. And that, and our underground, as far as when we see a heavy rainfall, we need to have, good drainage, and we are an older city, which we don't have, and we are taking a look at assessing the property owners to an additional rate, and that is causing a burden among those that are already struggling to pay for day-to-day, needs. And we know as a city that is a burden, but who else is going to cover the $100 million tab to replace some of the infrastructure to protect the city? These are the challenges that we face today as a result of climate-related goals. And in joining together as a city, we've taken a look at establishing a light rail plan for the future, a bridge to address getting people more safely and through bicycle and pedestrian access to enhance more safe routes for people to get through, and jobs more locally, and taking a look at where the West Sacramento and the Sacramento riverfront, bringing more jobs centrally located with the hospital on the other side and the rail yards and all the activity that's happening there. I think as two cities planning for the future for a long period of time, we've worked collaboratively very well.
We have.
I think we have.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple observations. One, Roger, I'm not just saying it to you, but that bill, I think, is a legacy bill, your groundwater bill. And I think the approach that you took in that bill was important and actually relatively rare. The idea that the state will only come in on the back end and take over if necessary. There are a few good examples of what I call the hard carrot strategy. And I think 375 and the SESs are one of those examples when it works well, which is that in many instances, the way it's supposed to work and does work is that major state and federal funding only goes to projects which are consistent with the projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions or are part of the GHG reduction plan. Again, it's not perfect, but that's a good example of a hard carrot. But it leads me to a second, maybe contrary observation, which is I don't think government does accountability very well. I think it is a word that is part of our political cliche vocabulary, right? We're holding them accountable. What? We don't do data very well. We don't use the data very well. I mean, I go back to housing and homelessness, and I know, we're focused mostly on environmental issues, but, I think it's really instructive. What is the definition of success when it comes to reducing homelessness? And what is the imperative? I can point to that 29% reduction in unsheltered homelessness in Sacramento and tout that as we did. And you know what most people think? The problem's still pretty serious and exists out there. I can yell to the moon, as I often do, about my frustration sometimes with county government not prioritizing the wraparound services for people who are the sickest of the sick. Because I authored Mental Health Services Act, Prop 63, and I know that those dollars are supposed to go to the people who are sickest of the sick, and that they're not. And there's no measurement or accountability or standard or requirement that says, we want you, as a state of California, to at least make sure that 50% of those slots go to people who are living in those encampments. And that's frustrating to me. And I think that there's a lot of that where we have not defined exactly what our objective is and then drive ourselves towards that objective. Now, we may come up short, and we may need to be flexible in terms of allowing locals more time. You know, the best accountability measures don't say, Roger's groundwater bill, 2042? Is that what it is? That's enough time, that's good. If you had said 2031, or if you had said 2028, your bill probably wouldn't have passed. So that's an okay accommodation, but at least it's something specific, objective. We don't do enough of that in government, and I think we need to be a little bit more precise about what we want to see and make it be publicly understandable to people, transparent, and then show that we're working towards that.
So let's follow up on that. Often the question, it seems to me, is how do you get somebody to do the right thing? How do you incentivize them to do the right thing? So
Hammer.
Yeah. But what the state does, and Martha, I want you to think about some aspect where the city of West Sacramento is at odds with something the state wants you to do. So you think about that for a second for this. Okay. But what we often do at the state level is we say, if you don't do this, we'll cut off your money. If you don't produce more affordable housing, we won't give you money to develop affordable housing. How does that work?
Right.
Because those who don't want to, jurisdiction A that doesn't really want affordable housing says, you're going to cut off our funding? Oh boy, we're really sorry to hear that. So how, I mean, take that as a hypothetical,
Yeah.
which is not hypothetical at all. How do you get jurisdiction A that doesn't really want affordable housing to actually develop affordable housing? How can you use tools that the state has available as an incentive? Either one of you.
Well, I'll talk about the HAP funding debacle last year when
Yeah.
the governor came out with this website on how jurisdictions are accomplishing their affordable housing, or just addressing homelessness, for example. That was simple, much more simple, homelessness, and advertising where counties were at, and some were maybe behind. Was that data accurate? Was it truly representing what the plans were and accomplishing? Did it reflect the actual investment to achieve the cost of meeting those goals? I think there were so many other metrics missing, so many more details that I think counties and cities are struggling not only just to put somebody in housing, but, as Darrell mentioned, with Prop 63, which so proud of that accomplishment, because I think that was a game changer for California. And I always share how, without Prop 63, we wouldn't be where we are in getting support for the mentally ill and trying to prevent it for those that we can catch early on. What I think it overlooked was some of the challenges for situations like that, for counties, Sacramento, for other counties who did not even want to tap Prop 63 funding at all. They were just leaving it behind, unused. And the cities were left to grapple with meeting their goals without the additional support. So when you tie funding into the state, sometimes transportation funding, when we're trying to meet our climate action goals in reducing greenhouse gases, if that funding is tied at the state and we need it, and they say you can only have it if you provide upfront money or if you pay, a huge percentage for debt, that doesn't help. That's one of the other things with the I Street Bridge. That doesn't help a local jurisdiction to be able to continue to grow the infrastructure. You want us to continue to build housing, but how do we get the people out of the city if you don't give us the funding to build the I Street Bridge? So we're locked in, there's congestion. We are being forced to continue to build. Do I sound frustrated? We are being forced to continue to build, but we are not given the funding for the infrastructure. And those are some of the challenges that I see.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes it's important that we step back and acknowledge that in this country and in this state, we have created Byzantine forms of government with unending players. And I mean, think about it. Okay, so you've got this massive state government representing 40 million people. We have these regional governments that are trying to work with local governments to implement state and regional goals, but don't dare tread on local control. And then you've got 500 plus cities and 48 counties. It's by definition complicated and difficult to enforce, so to speak, or to achieve what it is we set out to achieve. But that doesn't mean that we don't have the responsibility to continue to try. Obviously, incentive-based policies are where you always want to start. It's where you always want to start because you want to try to change behavior voluntarily. But I think there is a place, when I joked about the hammer, there is a place for the hammer. And one of the things we didn't talk about here, but we're in a law school, so we probably should, is do the courts of California, especially given the state of the federal judiciary, have a role in implementing and enforcing these laws? And I know what laws are you talking about. I'm going back to the housing and homeless issue. There's an experiment going on in Southern California now, and I would say it's of mixed results. And that is the famous, if you've read about him, the famous Judge Carter, federal Judge Carter, the ex-Marine, who walks the streets of Skid Row. He's a very different federal judge. You know, people like me have his cell phone number. We call him. Call me Dave, don't call me Judge. You know, he's really an interesting guy. And he has taken the whole issue of homelessness in Los Angeles, between the city and county, and he's pissed. And he is issuing orders requiring that the county commit to, or the 3,000 additional beds for the city, and he's really trying to drive it. And it's been imperfect. But I wonder if there are greater roles for inspector generals, for court monitors. You know, it can go bad, like the federal receivership in the Department of Corrections as well, that can last for 20 years. But whether or not there are other ways to kind of push towards the implementation of what everybody wants to, of the results that people want to see. Because the state's too big. The regional governments are great, but have their jurisdiction and their limitations vis-a-vis their local partners. Do the courts have a role to play in ensuring that that we get what we want? Certainly, there's some heroic American history around the role of the federal courts over a decade desegregating schools and upholding the civil rights of Americans in the southern part of the country. I think about that a lot and know that it's not, when I talk about a right to housing, I know that that's imperfect as well, because what does it mean? You're going to have 20,000 lawsuits flooding the courts in ways. But we need to think about all the instruments of power that we have to try to implement the underrated implementation, to implement the laws that we have fought so hard for.
So is a question then, who wields the hammer and how do they wield it? Is it impossible for local governments on their own to hammer each other, so to speak? So you're working with SACOG and the other COGs around the MPOs around the state on looking at improving SB 375. When we started out with the blueprint and adopted it in 2005, thanks James. There was no hammer. It would have required the SACOG board, subsequent to the adoption of the blueprint, to say to all the jurisdictions, if you don't act consistent with the blueprint, then you don't get your transportation funding. And nobody, I can tell you from personal observation, nobody on the SACOG board ultimately was willing to do that because it was, well, if you take away my funding this year, I'll get you back next year. So is it, Daryl, impossible for local governments to, in a sense, regulate or influence each other in these kinds of ways? And it's got to be left to someone else. And if it's someone else, who is it and how do they do it? Courts, state, feds?
Well, that's why I did 375 and why, I'm such a big fan of regional government, and I know I'm now get the privilege of working with them. But that's why I'm a big fan, because I think it is as close to a balance as possible. If the state's too big and locals are too parochial, then regional government, I think, provides at least an opportunity for the trade-offs to be considered in a civil and appropriate way within, with some hard carrot, right? Because major transportation funding is in fact tied to the implementation of what's called the blueprint, right? What's called the blueprint is now the sustainable community strategies. So I think in a way, regional government is an experiment, but maybe it's a vital experiment because the state's too big and the locals are too parochial to overgeneralize. And that you need those intermediary forms of both public and private institutions to be able to push towards where we want to go.
So, Martha, how do you feel about giving SACOG a whole lot more power over your life?
We love SACOG.
Yeah.
I would have to give credit to past Mayor Cabaldon, who established the building blocks of who SACOG is today. And because of that, it's been growing pretty strong and maintaining the sustainable growth and the parameters of accountability. I think we can tighten up the accountability side a little more, as you described. And that could be an ongoing discussion among the board members on how that can be achieved, because there have been intense dialogues in the past to try to break away and not comply. And then the threat that has among all of us who are trying to do the right thing and fulfilling the goals is pretty significant. So I do think that there is still, it's one of those human, processes that and there's leadership changes, by the way, that can happen and can throw everything off. So you do need to have some mechanisms in place when those dynamics do occur so that we can maintain and sustain what the planning process does have in mind. And also, I appreciate how SACOG is locked arm in arm with the region for the federal advocacy piece and bringing more clarity on the region and the needs of the region and working in partnership with everyone. And that's what I find in our small city, that partnership is, because we're a small city, is very necessary even to secure bipartisan support in some of those areas.
The success of the experiment, the regional governance experiment, also depends upon the willingness and the courage of all of the community leaders and the community stakeholders to invest in it in a real way. And so I have some friends here who are in the audience here who are part of our SB 375 modernization group, and they're doing a great job. People are really, the environmental community has stepped up. They're playing a significant role. And I posed a series of questions in the dialogue that people are taking seriously, even if they haven't yet fully answered them in a complete way, about what are the trade-offs that might be uncomfortable, but necessary in order to make progress when it comes to both realizing our climate goals and addressing our housing crisis, right? Which seem to be in some conflict because the builders argue that we can't just do infill, we have to, build elsewhere if we're going to meet the housing demand. And the environmental leadership is appropriately saying, well, wait a minute here. We made a state policy a long time ago that we were not going to just enable sprawl and allow builders to build anywhere, and we're trying to accommodate that. So I did this other bill after 375, which was SB 743, which was the King's bill, by the way, but it also contained a few other elements, including what I thought was not controversial at the time, allowing cities and counties to substitute out the LOS standard of review for traffic mitigation and replace it with VMT, which is vehicle miles traveled, the objective metric to determine whether or not there's traffic. I mean, and now the enviros love VMT and the builders hate it, and so does transit. And that's what's happened over time because, to make a long story dull, the Office of Planning and Research basically over the course of a decade decided that my VMT thing, which I thought was about infill and was supposed to be regulatory reform, would apply much broader. And the builders in Transportation California, the highway folks, are saying, God, they're taxing us to death with this VMT. Okay. So, at the same time, the environmental leadership has rightfully pointed out that Caltrans, in some ways, to pick on them, in the highway expansion, that they're running circles around the regional planning process. They're not accountable to a GHG reduction standard. They just, okay, they do their thing, separate funding, and powerful constituencies. So what do we do about this if we're going to strengthen regional planning? So we've kind of put out this idea, this scenario. Well, what if we held Caltrans and highway expansion fully accountable to a GHG standard in some way, and in exchange gave some secret relief to on the project level to the builders in Transportation California for projects that are within the sustainable community strategy. And nobody threw me out of the room when I suggested this. It's good. I mean, it's everybody's kind of holding back, but it's a discussion. And it's a discussion that needs to be had because ultimately, if the powerful careholders of this state who influence public policy, and by the way, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's a good thing if it's done in the right way. Ultimately, have to confront uncomfortable choices as well if we're going to advance these laws and make them work better for all of our goals. So,
Right.
yeah.
I still lie awake at night and wonder why I carried SB 743 on the assembly floor for you.
You saved the Kings, which, yeah. Oh, it was oh God, yes.
Well, let's explore this a little bit further, and we're in a little bit of a transition from housing as the focus to infrastructure, married to climate, of course.
Yeah.
One of the difficulties that we certainly see in the Sacramento region, and I suspect it exists elsewhere around the state in the metropolitan regions, is finding alignment between those who are representing more urban constituencies and those that are representing more suburban or rural constituencies. And there are endless number of examples that we could cite from the Sacramento region that have that conflict in them. So in terms of, from the city of West Sacramento's point of view, for example, which is a more urban kind of jurisdiction, and then more broadly, Darryl, from the standpoint of what you're working on and seeing around the state, what are the pathways to getting greater alignment, do you think, among the jurisdictions that start from, frankly, fundamentally different points of view? You want to start?
You go ahead and start. Sorry.
So one of the things we haven't talked about, but it was in the proposed questions that made me think about, thinking a little bit about, is of course our whole government finance structure and the way we tax ourselves. For 30 years in this business, I've always wondered this. Why is it when local elected officials tell their constituents that exactly how they intend to spend their constituents' money, that it is a 2/3 vote threshold if it's passed by the governing body? It's not different if it's a signature initiative. Why is it a 2/3 vote to pass that specific tax? And if you're not flippant, but very general about how you might spend their money, it's a simple majority vote. I know the history of that. That was part of the Jarvis conspiracy to strangle state and local government. And there has been some liberalization of that by virtue of a California Supreme Court, or maybe appellate or Supreme Court decision, that basically said if citizens gather the signatures for a special tax, it's a majority vote, and that's been used some, but it's expensive to do. Why that isn't flipped on its head? I know I had this experience as mayor of Sacramento when I passed Measure U, and I suffered for it, and I probably should have known better, frankly, because I went out there and said, let's raise the sales tax in Sacramento a 1/2 cent, and I promised that we were going to invest a lot of that money in what I called inclusive economic development, and art and culture, and environment, and the environment. That's what I said. And in part because of COVID, we were able to get $120 million of federal money that we did invest in that as opposed to city government. But frankly, most of the Measure U money went to police, fire, and pensions. And I wanted that money, and I wanted it to invest in growing Sacramento in the right way. And I was able to achieve a lot of that, but in very indirect ways. But I think it hurt me a little bit credibility-wise, honestly, because of the general tax nature of that. Well, why isn't it reversed? Because I think that if the citizenry had more control over their stated priorities, and it was easier to fund those priorities, in theory at least, you'd rely less on the state and less on those from the top telling you how to define your priorities. But as long as we have this Byzantine system of financing government, I think we're going to continue to struggle in this way.
Martha, how do you find more alignment with Lincoln and Rockland and Placerville and West Sacramento and Winters?
For example, what you mentioned there, Darryl, is police, fire, and the competing, salaries that they go off to, where West Sacramento did see a 50% turnover in our police department. Fire, they don't transition as much, but what you have is a public safety issue. You don't have retail wanting it to come in and establish themselves. They find an increase in homelessness and no way to service people. It can become problematic if you don't have a trained, educated, prepared, thanks to you, Darryl, with your last Senate bill, with a clinician to provide appropriate treatment. That for me is also infrastructure. When you're taking a look at growing and housing development. But what I did see when we passed our Measure O ballot measure, our last one, and we did go out and it has an advisory language, which is something that our city is very committed to, not spending outside of what we said we were going to spend the money for. And in the advisory language, we found that the roads were a priority. People are really basic mayoral duties, fix the roads, get rid of the potholes. And that was the priority, which we are establishing. And the next is homelessness. We want you to get people into housing. And it's not the measure money that really achieves that. It's the CDBG, the federal funding, where we did convert the motels into transitional housing services. And we did receive earmarks for federal funding and state funding. But the other is what I find as, as mayor, what keeps us awake at night is the infrastructure. When you continue to build more housing, where are the cars going to go? How are we going to get people to and from their destinations without being, and every morning we still see a traffic jam, and we haven't built out some of the biggest housing development that we have recently approved. And when we take a look at how this is going to look in the future, we know this is going to be a crisis in West Sacramento. Without building additional bridges outside, where we have the Enterprise Bridge in the planning effort, we have the Broadway Bridge, we have the I Street Bridge, which we're trying to move, forward. It's years behind already. We have a light rail that we're trying to get going. These are all projects that have been planned, but we have not been able to get fully funded and in operation. And yet the housing is coming in. And so, then we have our below, the ground, getting the water to and from, getting people the water and the sewage out. And also being able to get the demands through other utility uses that people have. Those are expensive costs when it comes down to construction. And those costs along the riverfront in certain parts of the cities are covered through our impact fee reduction, where we were able to spur more affordable housing for one project by reducing that cost of housing by $1 million. And where there's a shared community group where there are people who are older, wanted to sell their big house and come into a shared community living environment, and that significantly reduced the cost of building their housing. So these are mechanisms as a city we can do, but we don't find any additional support outside without the Enhanced Infrastructure Financing District or without the reduction of impact fees for regular market rate housing. We don't find the additional support outside of that. And that's where we're looking to the Road to Housing Act or the Housing for the 21st Century Act to provide support, where we are working in a public-private partnership that the mayor mentioned, and the mayor was also a member of that in the past, and you also helped to keep that group going strong as a chair. I just want to say that we are continuing that momentum. We should have you as a fly-in whenever we're going out there because of your history, your institutional memory, and all of what's going on here. Because there is a need for that, for either one of those two bills to get passed, so that funding comes in to provide for all the structure that's needed. As you build a house, whether it be homelessness, it'll come with the jobs, it'll come with the infrastructure, and all the additional support that local governments are facing.
I once gave a State of the City speech, maybe a State of the Downtown speech, where I said, I want to talk to you about an attention-grabbing concept, something that is going to inspire you to action, EIFD. I actually kind of said it that way. And I got a couple laughs, and people looked at me strangely. But the idea of the EIFD, and I think, Roger, you were really involved in that in the legislature, maybe authored that, is really actually very powerful, especially if it's expanded. Because it's an enhanced infrastructure finance district. It's an old version of tax increment, of redevelopment, but the difference is that everybody has to agree, the city has to agree to siphon off part of its own property tax, and they can even do sales tax to fund climate or economic development initiatives. And it's attractive because for city leaders, in part because there's no other means of funding climate or economic development initiatives except for the hotel tax, hotel tax you can use for anything relating to tourism to fund economic development. But when it comes to climate, like we had this great climate plan between the city and County of West Sacramento, beautiful plan, completely unfunded. And the city, the problem in cities is that the culture is, hey, we're a basic services corporation. We do police and fire. We'll mow the lawns in the park. We do a smattering of parks and recreation when we can afford it. And if there's an arts grant or two that we can hand out, then great. If not, we're going back to police and fire. Overgeneralizing a little bit again, but not much. The thing about it, an EIFD, is it's a commitment over time to actually investing in quality of life, however the city defines it. And I think it ought to be expanded. And maybe as a sneaky way to bring back a better form of redevelopment, so that cities and counties can dream about how to do things that enhance the quality of life, not just prevent bad things from happening.
So, you know, I was just thinking about a moment ago when you were talking about why the simple majority for general tax, 2/3 majority for special tax, and an elected Republican colleague enlightened me on that one time. He said the drafters, you were alluding to this, the drafters of the Jarvis folks thought it would be easier to pass a tax measure when you told people exactly how you were going to use the money, and so they made the threshold higher for that than for a general tax, which they thought. So
That's not cynical.
They were interested in perversion.
Yes.
But the comments you both just made make me wonder whether in this world that of not very sensible, perhaps, government structure in which we live these days, are we left really looking at ourselves and our local jurisdictions for both the motivation and the mechanisms to achieve the things that we want, which may be more housing, and particularly affordable housing, may be climate and goals and efforts, may be the development of infrastructure. You know, we followed on the EIFD legislation with a bill that Senator Bill Dodd carried, SB 852, in, I want to say, 20 or so. 22, I think, which allows local governments to either singly or in combination create climate resilience districts as a way of financing investments in climate efforts. And so I just pose the question to each of you, do we see regional government as something that's nice, but we really can't have an expectation that it's going to lead us ultimately to the kinds of things that we know need to be done in our communities? Can we not count on the state, or certainly in these times, the federal government, to provide the resources, the incentives, the direction? Are we left to our own devices locally to accomplish what we need to do?
Wow, that's a big question.
That's why they made me the moderator.
Well, I do think, I don't know. I think that leadership really matters, just matters. Whether or not leaders are willing to push envelopes and push boundaries and barriers and are willing to incur some pain along the way. I'm not talking about myself, of course. It's sort of my life experience as a politician. And there would have been, I could have chosen easier ways to do things. But sometimes I do feel, though, that that leadership does matter, and that pushing the boundaries is really important. Even if you're not going to get all the way, you're going to get farther than you might otherwise get. I would, and why? Here's what matters. I'm going to talk about a current example in Sacramento, and that is Senator Ashby's 802, which is the Homeless Joint Powers Authority bill. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a bill to require the city and county and other cities within the county to actually govern homelessness together. And oh my God, there's an outcry around this bill. No, we can't do this, blah, blah, blah. And there's all kinds of suggested alternatives, et cetera. And her bill probably is really imperfect in the way she's choosing to do it. But the idea of joint governance around a major priority for the people of Sacramento is undeniable to me. So will the leadership actually come forward with the right alternatives to make her imperfect vehicle better, or to throw out her vehicle and suggest a different way of trying to achieve joint governance? And the same way I feel about regional government is, are we going to have the courage to empower regional government, even if it means some sacrifice within and among existing principled positions? And even if we're never going to violate local control, but even if it treads a little bit more on, longly held notions for the greater good. Because I think we do better when we govern together and when we reason together in both informal and informal ways.
Thoughts, Martha?
Well, there's a lot of thoughts here. As I listen to Darrell and remember where we started off as a city on the riverfront, where we established Raley Field then, Sutter Health Park now, and how the growth came around a stadium, how the interest and the investment and the planning moved, not always smoothly, but necessarily so, in order for us to thrive as a city. Now, we received a very generous property tax revenue share, which is why EIFD is successful in West Sacramento. Our I think a revenue share is 48% compared to other jurisdictions, which are between 8 to 12%. So our revenue share is so significant that we can truly make an impact in the infrastructure of our city, and that draws developers to come in and take a look at what we can accomplish moving forward. But taking a look at the climate action goals coupled with that, because we know the state has the mandates and we know that they are necessary and I have fully invested in meeting those climate action goals and became a climate mayor and wanted to learn from other states, wanted to learn from other jurisdictions. What can we do to further accomplish these goals? And incentivize in any kind of way to encourage not only businesses, but homes, and taking a look at weatherizing. That's the most popular aspect, is weatherizing homes today. I don't think we pay enough attention to that, but our partnership with Habitat for Humanity, where we set aside funding, and taking a look at our electric utility, PG&E, and I'm working more closely to say, where is your investment to help reduce the cost for those, to make it more affordable? Because it is cost prohibitive for them to pay the PG&E bills. And that partnership is coming from leadership. It has to, in order for us to move forward and make that public-private partnership, has to be through not only the electeds, but also with federal and state funding supports. So in looking at it from a small level to VIA, which is a privately owned company, where it does meet the climate action goals, which is why I continue to bring up VIA, why that particular program is important, because of the number of rides, 1.1 million rides since 2020. And so there is a demand for those type of programs. And how are city leaders going to look outside of the box and try to meet those goals? beyond what we're doing today. And also, our Measure O has helped be able to draw down another EIFD project moving forward, which is funding the additional I Street Bridge and partially our Enterprise Crossing in order to address the future transportation demand that we're going to have with the additional housing that's going to be built. So these are all as a result, and that's the risk that all of us on City Council, we do take hits, as Daryl reminds us. I'm still in it, so I'm ducking. I don't want to come out, you know, and it's how we have to maintain being able to move things forward. It's not always a popular decision, but it is how we can make progress.
You know, you mentioned Rayleigh Field. It reminds me that part of the problem, part of the challenge is there are rarely political benefits from acting regionally for local elected officials, and so I think that's an inhibition as well. But you mentioned Rayleigh Field, and we put together a joint powers authority of the City of West Sacramento, the County of Yolo, and the County of Sacramento to finance the construction of Rayleigh Field, the ballpark in West Sacramento. I was very involved in that, and people would say, why is the County of Sacramento involved in helping to finance a baseball stadium that's going to be built in Yolo County? And my response was always, where do you think most of the people are going to come from that go to that ballpark? But there was no real reward for stepping beyond the outlines of Sacramento County in that regard.
Leadership.
So, well, that's not a reward, let me tell you. We're going to take the biggest risk of the morning and actually invite you to ask questions.
Brave souls. Okay, who wants to be the first?
So on the issue of housing, what can you imagine? You know, there's an issue with corporations buying up starter homes and really squeezing first-time home buyers out of the market. I think this is a huge issue, and I'm sure that the amount of housing is an issue for sure, but the accessibility to housing is really an issue. Can any of you address that? Thank you.
Well, I know this issue's gotten a lot of attention recently, and rightfully so. It's wrong. And I think that there is proposed state legislation that the governor has already come out and said he would support. So I think California, as it often does, will take a lead role in at least limiting the ability of these equity funds to be able to buy up housing and drive up the prices in the way that they're doing, because that is a terrible abuse, and it needs to be limited, if not stopped. So I would expect to see it as a major priority item this year in the legislature.
And I believe it's long overdue.
Yeah.
As well, because in jurisdictions where you see not only that, but cannabis growing homes, they just go in and buy the homes and do, you know, criminal activity as far as something like that, and not be able to resolve it with police force, who probably has their limitations now. But the flipping of the homes among those that come in with the equity funds, I think we can stop that now, hopefully with this bill. Very supportive of that.
Yeah, I would also expect state legislation. I'm sure Martha has stories, as I do, of people we've talked to who said, you know, I was interested in buying a home. I put in an offer. I was going to finance it, and somebody walked in with cash. And it's, you know, it's this phenomena. So it's distorting the market. But I would also say that the real challenge is producing a lot more housing. Ultimately, I think that's keeping your eye on the ball. That's the ball. Is a lot more supply.
I know that a leader is, I don't know who, has come out and said they're going to introduce it. It'd be easy to look up.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you. I'm John Shribs, a city council member for City of Petaluma. And I share everything you've said. We're doing the exact same problems and issues and frustrations that you're going through right now, general plans in the process and everything. A current controversy that we're having, I think that's happening statewide, I think we should all be interested in. We have a crisis of teenagers with e-bikes doing things. Emergency folks have come up to us, both the hospitals and the police are saying things are happening. And every city and county is doing something different right now and trying to figure out what to do. And this is where I think when you're talking about state versus county versus city, we really need to get together, make a uniform policy across the state. It'd be nice across the U.S., but we need it across the whole state, and so that we can work all together and have the same program. Things are happening with small mowers, type of things, small engines. That's happening from the state. We're doing all sorts of things, housing from the state, but the state's not doing this part. How can we get the state to pick up and really help out so that we all agree that this is where we need to go? Because we need education of everybody. We need regulations. We need maybe licensing of certain things. And right now it's a free-for-all. And people are going on the internet buying things from China and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. So how can we work together as a team to get more uniform?
Mr. Pro Tem, how are you going to solve that?
I mean, the first answer is that cities that are dealing with this, you need to organize, right? There needs to be, because honestly, this is, I'm out of office now, but I haven't heard of this as a major problem, and you're just identifying it as such.
Oh, no, it's a huge problem.
No, I'm not denying it. I'm just saying that I'm not sure everybody is aware how big of a problem that it is. And so the first step to creating any kind of political action is to organize and to, make your presence felt around a compelling issue, and whether that's a day at the Capitol, whether it's a public affairs strategy where you're getting stories and spreading the word about this, and then get a member of the administration or a lead legislator to pay attention to this. May or may not require a bill, but a bill, by the way, just in terms of legislative parlance, a bill itself may not end up a law, but it can be an organizing principle. And sometimes I think people think, well, a bill, well, what's the law you're trying to make? You may not. It may require a law, but it may be just the very thing to get the attention that will propel others to do what is necessary, either at the state and local level, to stop something bad. Well, you have to elevate the issue and organize around it.
It's a third threat right now for our whole system, active transportation plans, our road work and everything. And there's the public are going, wait a minute, this is crazy. We're going to eliminate the whole thing and stop all bicycle pathways because of this. So it's a huge.
That would be an overreaction, right?
Right.
A master of understatement. Thanks.
Thank you, Howard. I just wanted, for those who are interested in this issue on e-bikes, I represent the organization that's the National Trade Association for the bike industry, the responsible sellers of bicycles, and we are trying to run a bill. We're currently working with Senator Blake Spear, and about half the legislature is trying to run a bill on this right now, so they are very aware that it's an issue. And if you want my card, I'm happy to give you my card and loop you into the conversations we're having. I just wanted to ask a quick question to the panel, and thank you all for your reflections. Mayor Guerrero, you just briefly talked about VIA, and I wonder if you all could reflect on public transit a little bit, because this is sort of another layer. It operates somewhat regionally, but not exactly at the SACOG kind of jurisdiction level, but certainly across local jurisdictions. How do we address public transportation? Because I'm actually very concerned about sort of the VIAs of the world, the private companies, Waymo, coming in and basically cannibalizing public transit, which is really a vital service. And so how are you thinking about transit in the context of all this?
We do need to maintain public transit, which is the Yolo County Transit. I think we're working to, with SAC-RT as well. I think as a region, we need to have both. And with the light rail plan, that is going to be providing a fixed transit route along the corridors where we anticipate high utilization to connect to the SAC-RT station in order for people to get to different, via on-demand rideshare program cannot provide or sustain that level of resource demand. It's only as far as a local need, for within a city. And we did try expanding it a little bit across the river to Kaiser and other medical facilities, and also to SAC-RT, but it didn't achieve, I think, the goals. We did see a high utilization rate, but we scaled it back. It is very expensive, very costly. So we wanted to make sure that we preserve Yolo County Transit first, and as a supplement, if there's additional funding, if cities can afford to do it, which we can, to expand a little bit with VIA. The reason why I'd like to preserve it is the high utilization rate among those that have been underserved and in demand for some form of public transportation that gets them to from work. A lot of our other high utilizers are our high schoolers.
So we obviously need more public transit. And is it a fair question to ask, is the perception that public transportation in many countries in Europe are safe, reliable, and land use is done in such a way that it makes transit the first option, compared to our country and our state where transit is just less attractive and necessary because we're so reliant on cars, and maybe we don't take as much pride in the system as we should. That was a question. That was a question, because I've taken Capitol Corridor and I've had some great experiences. And then I took my son to the 49er game and took Capitol Corridor on a Sunday, and it was double booked and oversold, people sitting in the stairwells and people standing for 2.5 hours. And I had just returned from Japan, my wife, and where it was just this pristine, lovely experience. And let's just say I noted the difference. Yes, and I think we need to take more pride in what the experience is all about.
I would just say, as a member of the Capitol Corridor Joint Powers Authority Board, we strive for crush load.
And let me tell you, that was obvious. So next time we're driving.
I would say this, that public transit is under extreme stress all across California. And it's really a time of necessity for rethinking how we approach public transportation. And there's a lot of conversation about first mile, last mile, as I'm sure you know what will work best. Fixed rail or fixed guideways. More malleable kinds of route structures, local buses. It's really a time when we have to reconsider how we go about providing public transit, both in order to be more effective and more efficient with the resources that are available, but secondly, to also enjoy public support for it, because that is a real challenge right now. And this is a much longer conversation, but I think it is a time when we have to decide collectively whether we believe public transportation is viable and has a role in our transportation array or not. I think we're at that kind of crucial turning point, actually.
I think we have time for one more. Yeah?
Peter Vorster, Friends of the River, Mona Lake Committee in the Kern River. But the transportation, everything you guys said are fantastic. And do we, pride, the last mile, could we have a vision where some of this, the VIA model could be joined with public transportation? Why not have them do it?
Yeah.
And then lastly, Capitol Corridor. We've done over the years the Capitol Corridor from the Bay Area to Sacramento is the water train. We've done literally taken over the top, the Oakland Museum, the Bay Institute. We actually had speakers, and you could learn about it. You learn 86 points of interest. I mean, you can do things with what we have already to make it a really neat experience. So that's consistent with the pride that this is, you'll enjoy yourself, which it sounds like, when you're not standing up for 2.5 hours. It's an amazing ride. It goes through places that you can't get to by regular transportation.
All right, Jim.
Well, I mean, certainly the rideshare services are a very obvious opportunity for connection, first mile, last mile with public transit, and there are a lot of transit agencies that are promoting alliances or connections with ride-sharing services for that purpose. I suspect people do use VIA for that to some extent.
They do. I will say Yolo County Transit already has a comparable program, and they're up for a bid, and VIA is now going to compete for the bid for the current model at this time. I think VIA is interested in taking a look at a more dynamic version of that, looking at meeting some gaps in the public transportation area, and with the AI technology and finding out where those gaps are, it can help adapt what has been currently delivered and what are the possibilities of delivering more. And the reason why it would be, I think, a benefit to West Sacramento is because it can help expand in the partnership with Yolo County Transit, who has had this public-private model already.
So I'm just going to answer it this way. In a little story, in 2011, when I was pro tem of the Senate, I had 25 Democrats in my caucus, and we were debating high-speed rail. And no Republican would vote for it. And I had 4 Democrats who were on the record saying they opposed it, and for rational reasons, actually. They didn't like the route and the way it was done. And so I had to pull what I called an inside straight and get every one of my 21 remaining colleagues to vote for the first major appropriation. And we did it. And let's just say that there has been some controversy and uneven performance over the course of the last 14 years. And so you ask me today, do I regret that action and that vote? And the answer is absolutely not. Jerry Brown used to say, without vision, we perish, right? We need to be forging ahead. The water taxi, these ideas are so vital and important. We have to keep dreaming and doing, even if the road is sometimes rough. So that's that.
Yeah, and just as we close out, this actually creates an opportunity to connect a few dots that are part of this session, because passenger rail service between here and the Bay Area was about to be eliminated, and it was actually legislation that allowed the creation of the Capital Corridor Joint Powers Authority, which is composed of elected officials and appointed officials from the local jurisdictions along the alignment from San Jose to Placer County to come together to try to reinvigorate and make viable that service. It has worked, and it has worked for the San Joaquins as well. And it is actually a great
San Joaquins, the Gold Runner.
A Gold Runner, thank you. It's actually a great example of local governments getting together in common purpose to accomplish something that's very important. And most people don't realize that the second, third, and fifth most heavily used intercity passenger rail corridors are in California. Not anywhere else. We think, and we're characterized as being the state of everyone getting in their car, and we all, or most of us do get in our cars. But we also, given the opportunity for good and excellent service, we get in on the train, we get on our bikes, we walk, we do all those things. Corey, I think we're out of time, unfortunately. That's up to Howard.
A quick question.
One quick comment, it was a PCL initiative back in 1990, Prop 116.
Prop 116.
By original funding to make these rail projects possible. Capital Corridor, as well as the first money for Metrolink in Southern California. So PCL was very involved in this from the
I think it was Prop 111 and Prop 116. Is that both of them?
Yes.
So, Prop 111 was, legislature did 100 million, PCL's initiative did 200 million. So that year voters approved 300 million because they approved both measures.
So we now need PCL to come back with another initiative for
More public transportation.
$1 billion.
Excellent.
Thank you all.
Thank you.